Careful the things you say. Children will listen. This is one of the main takeaways in the Broadway musical Into the Woods. Any other Into the Woods fans here? A couple? Okay, good. It's a mashup of several Brothers Grimm fairy tales with music and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. And the main characters, a baker and his wife, are on a quest to satisfy the demands of the witch, the other main character, so that they might break the curse that she has put upon them. And on their journey, they cross paths with Cinderella and her family, with Little Red Riding Hood, with Jack of the Beanstalk fame, Rapunzel, multiple princes, the Big Bad Wolf, and other familiar characters whose stories become intertwined and interconnected and get a little messy. Wishes are granted, curses are undone, mistakes are made, consequences are doled out, and their world is saved, sort of. It's a retelling of so many classic fairy tales, but it isn't really a fairy tale at all. And I won't spoil it, but if you haven't seen it, I hope you get the chance. In the show's finale, the witch sings, "Careful the things you say, children will listen. Children may not obey, but children will listen." And then in what is my favorite lyric of the whole show, and maybe my favorite lyric of any show, the witch sings, "Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. Children will listen." It's the core message of the show, and I think it's the core message of our psalm today, too. The stories that we tell matter. They have power, like a spell almost. Which ones we choose to tell and how we choose to tell them, that shapes who we are and who we'll be. Remembering, or not remembering, changes us. The psalmist reminds us to be intentional about this because stories are easy to lose, right? Just last week, when I had you all shout, "Not today, Satan," if you weren't here for that, I won't go into details, but that happened. When I told you all to shout, "Not today, Satan," to the critical voices in your head that hold you back, I didn't realize that I had lost an important part of that story. Jonathan reminded me after the service that that phrase, "Not today, Satan," comes from Black drag culture, right? That's an important part of that story to tell that I was missing. It was made famous on RuPaul's Drag Race. Any RuPaul fans here? Okay, thank you. When season 6 winner Bianca Del Rio said it in response to some shady comments made by another contestant. But that history has been overtaken by coffee mugs and crocheted pillows on the couches and cabinets of white women who are at the same time actively trying to ban drag and denigrate drag culture. Stories are easy to lose. And sometimes we actually try to suppress the stories that we don't like, right? Book banning is big business, especially here in Texas this year. Or we try to suppress the stories that we don't like ourselves in. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Tomorrow is Juneteenth, the celebration of the official freeing of enslaved people in Texas on June 19th, 1865, a full 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Do you know how many times I talked about, or my education talked about Juneteenth, my Texas education? 0, right? We don't like that look, so we don't tell that story. I'm hoping that's not true for all of you, but we know that even now there is a concerted effort to ban teaching the parts of our history that make us uncomfortable, that make us look bad. The fear-mongering about CRT, critical race theory, is all about suppressing the parts of our story, hiding them from our children, and it's no wonder our world is still mired in racism, right? The stories we tell make us who we are. The stories we don't tell make us who we are. And the psalmist tells us not to hide our history, not to lose our stories, but to recount the praiseworthy deeds of God, her might, and the wonderful work she has done to all the generations to come. And the psalm goes on to do that by remembering the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of Israel's history. We only read the intro, y'all, but this psalm is the second longest in the Bible, so it's a good one to go back to if you want to remember some of our faith story. It all matters, the psalmist insists, so that children yet to be will put their confidence in God and not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation. Our faith requires telling our stories honestly and intentionally, not to make ourselves look good, but to make sense of where we are now, where we are heading, where we don't want to go. Our stories are not just a rehearsal of historic facts. They have the power to change us, to give us hope. The stories that the psalmist goes on to tell in Psalm 78 are complicated stories. They highlight God's power and might, for sure, but they also highlight the ups and downs, and really downs, of Israel's faithfulness. The ups and downs of how and whether God interacted with God's people. It's not propaganda. It's not an outreach tool. It's not a dry account of dates and facts. It's remembering with purpose. Remembering the past to shape our future. And I think that's what we are called to do as God's people now. When we think about who we are now as individuals, who we are as a congregation, what stories do we tell? Sure, we can spout out biographical information about our lives, when and where we were born, educational history, family members, jobs, but what are the stories that actually make you you? What are the stories your parents told you that shaped who you became? What are the stories you want to continue to tell for others to know you, to understand you? When people ask me about this place, about UBC, I tell them that we were founded in 1908. I tell them that our beautiful, historic sanctuary building was completed in 1921. But historical data only tells them so much, right? That's not really what they're asking. As any of you who saw Hans's performance as UBC architect Albert Kelsey last year know, there's a whole lot more to the story, even those teeny tiny little pieces of it, than dates of completion of the building, right? When people want to know who we are, I tell them about being the first white Baptist church in Texas to integrate seating and to welcome black members, and about the drama that caused, and the ways we screwed that up, and the ways that God was still with us as we carried on. I tell them about the ordination of women as deacons in the 1970s and of queer folks in the 1990s, and the drama that caused, and the ways we screwed that up, and the ways God was with us as we moved on. I tell them about becoming a reproductive freedom congregation and about confronting our faith's history of colonialism by learning from our indigenous neighbors. And we're still learning about the ways we're screwing those up, and the ways God will still be with us, and the ways that we will move on. But even those sweeping statements don't really tell the full story, right? Of conflict and loss, of joy and the Spirit's movement, of people's hearts and minds changed, of finding belonging, of making mistakes, of starting again together. So what are the stories that we need to tell? I don't know them all. What do you need to practice remembering to make sense of who you are as a person and to look to the future with hope? What stories do you need to remember about this place? What do we need to tell to the children to shape where we're going? I want to invite you to reflect for just a moment, either on your own faith journey or on your experience here at UBC, or maybe some combination of both of those things. And think of a story that feels important to pass on. The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? What's a story that feels important to pass on to generations to come? Maybe it's a story you've heard about our past. Maybe it's a story you've experienced recently. What are the stories that we need to keep alive? I hope you've got a few. And if you will allow me to invite you into some interactive work. You're like, surprise, surprise, this is Natalie's summer. Sorry, y'all. I'm going to invite you to move around from where you are and find a buddy or two. Get in a group of 2 or 3. If you don't want to, that's okay too. But if you will, get in a group of 2 or 3 people. Preferably have someone there that doesn't live in your same house, and share the story that just came to your mind. Now, we don't have a ton of time, so I'll time it, maybe do 2 minutes each. But whatever came to your mind just now as you were reflecting on, what is something important for me to practice telling about myself or about our congregation? What are the stories that we need to tell and keep alive? How do we need to tell them to shape our future? Practice telling that to someone now. I'm going to give you a minute to find your partner, and then I'm just going to kind of walk around, and then I'll give you it'll be about 5 minutes total. You'll have 2 minutes each. Does that sound doable? Are you willing? I'm asking for consent. I'm seeing some people that don't like to work in groups. I'm one of those people, I know, but let's try it. If you're with us online, or if you just are not into this idea, then I'll invite you to write it down. Take an offering envelope or a piece of paper and just write down a story that maybe you can tell to someone later. All right? Ready, set, go. I'm tempted to say, okay, now split up your groups and go tell all those stories to another group, but I'm not going to do it. But I do think there's something here, right? I think we've been hearing from Dominique several weeks ago, our guest preacher, who was talking about bearing witness to each other, about the way God is showing up in our lives. And then some other of our guests have been bringing up this idea of telling our stories. And I think sometimes as a more, progressive church, we shy away from things like witness or testimony. But maybe we need to reclaim some of that, telling our story, being intentional about that, and framing that in a way that's really healthy and truthful and good. So I'm just trying to say, I think I see a theme coming on. I'm going on vacation soon, but when I come back. So I think we'll have more chances to tell these stories, to talk to each other about them. And if you have ideas about that and want to be involved in that planning, just let me know for sure. But as I walked around, I heard people talking about relationships, about weddings, about God's provision, stories about conflict, stories about belonging, really beautiful things that we need to hold on to. So thank you for participating in that interactive activity, and know that I'm going to be asking you to tell more about these stories. As more of them come to your mind, we'll have more opportunities to think about the tale that we tell. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. So may we today, as we begin this good work, give thanks for all of our stories, the variety and the beauty in each one. May we continue to practice telling them honestly and intentionally. And may they help us find our way forward and find grace that is abundant and all around us even now. Thanks be to God. Amen.